for inviting me. As you probably know, I've only got a few days left before I collect my P45 or whatever you do when you stop being leader of the party. But I wanted to finish up with my last leader's visit to the West Country. I was in Wales, Brecon at the weekend. I hope incidentally some of you are going. They're desperate for people. I mean, it's the biggest constituency in Britain, well, certainly England and Wales. Vast distances, and they need bodies and they need cars. So, but I did want to finish up here, in a large part because of your candidate now, former MP. We had a very, very good working relationship in the coalition government. It was one of the bits of the coalition government that worked. Yes. And Tessa was a great colleague and a great MP, and it was a great sadness when she and I and lots of other people finished up as casualties in 2015, and I got my way back, and I'm hoping she will be getting her way back at the next election, and all the evidence I'm seeing of hard work and relationship building, she'll be there. But since I'm here, I'll just give a sort of wider perspective. I think first of all, in terms of the journey that we've travelled as a party, pretty much since the first week of the coalition, or shortly after the first week of the coalition, our national support fell to single figures. It wasn't anything we did. It was the formation of the coalition. We were abandoned by large amounts of support, and for the last 9 years, our support's been pretty much nationally in single figures. I mean, there have been areas of concentrated support which we've held on to, but for most of the decade we've been at that depressed level. In the last 3 months, 6 months, that has changed out of all recognition, as you know. I don't think it was a fluke, and I don't think it was just a protest vote, and I don't think it was just a Remainer vote at all. I think a lot of solid work had gone in around the country, rebuilding the local government base, rebuilding infrastructure. Local by-elections were being won all around the country and have been for the last 2 or 3 years. But we had 2 big breakthroughs. The first was in the local council elections, and a whole lot of councils were won. We got 700 seats net, which was never been recorded in our history. And then we went on to do extremely well in the Euro elections, as you know. And if you put together the Dems, the Greens, and some of the smaller Remain parties, we outvoted Brexit and the Tories, as it happens. It was presented as a great victory for the Brexit party, it actually wasn't. And we did exceptionally well, and 16 MEPs, if we would have settled for 10 even the day before, and it was an extraordinary upsurge of support. But almost more important than that, the support has been sustained. We're now pretty much around 20% in the polls. Fluctuates obviously from week to week and poll to poll, but we've pretty much doubled our support or more, and it seems permanent. We've gone to a different level. What I think is the case at the moment is that we now have a sort of 4-party system, with 4 parties each with 20% each, and that may be unstable, and something may change it quite rapidly. But that seems to be the kind of new politics that's emerging, and we're very much at the centre of it. We had a poll conducted by YouGov last week, which showed that if there was a general election tomorrow, we'd finish up with 70 MPs, probably, up to 150 or down to 30 odd. But 70 was the sort of mid-range, and Wells is one of them actually. So you're on track to come back. But not just Yeovil, but places like Taunton that we had sort of written off, but are now coming back very strongly, a very active candidate, and Yeovil. In fact, one of the best things about the local elections was that we came back so strongly in Somerset. I mean, we knew we were going to do well in some of places like St Albans and Chelmsford, which are near London and suburban and very Remain. But I went to the launch of the Somerset local campaign, South Somerset, and the council leader, who we'd run this council for 30 odd years, was very pessimistic. She thought that people were going to turn against us, that it was heavily Leave in that part of Somerset, but actually we improved our position. And the fact that we are, cutting through in areas like Somerset, North Devon, Tinbridge, which are Leave areas, they're not suburban Remain like mine, shows the strength and depth of our support. And I think if we win in Brecon on August the 1st, which is very much on the cards, certainly the vibes I got when I went at the weekend were very good. I think that again will give us another lift and help sustain us into the autumn. So I think from the party point of view, we're in very good shape. The bigger question is what's happening in the country and where we are with the Brexit. How is it all going to turn out? I'm afraid my view is it's a terrible mess, and I don't really see any easy way forward. I'm not going to come in with some simple panacea or indeed an optimistic forecast. I don't know what's going to happen. But there are quite a lot of things that simply don't add up and which are going to have to be resolved in a very intense period of time, because if you think about it, Parliament closes next week. It's then closed for 5 weeks. Not just Parliament, government is not functioning. The European Commission will shut down for a month, nothing will happen. We then, in early September, have, I think, 10 days in Parliament. And then Parliament breaks up again for another 3 weeks for party conferences. And all of the issues, which will probably determine the future of the country for the next decade or more, will then be resolved in about 10 days in the beginning of October. And none of us can quite see how this is going to happen in any coherent way. If we go over some of the things which Boris Johnson is telling us, or at least he's telling the Conservative Party membership, which may not be what he continues to talk about, but he's basically saying that they will negotiate a Brexit deal which doesn't have the Irish backstop and doesn't have some of the other features that the Conservative backbenchers objected to and the Ulster Unionists before. But we know that that isn't going to happen. It is absolutely not going to happen because the European Union negotiates as a bloc. They've essentially finished negotiations. They're not going to reopen them. These so-called technological solutions have already been investigated and they don't work. So there is no way that he can deliver what he's promised to deliver. And the new European President, the German Defence Minister, is quite explicit that there is no way that the European Union are going to change their fundamental position and abandon Ireland. They're not going to do that. Johnson then says, if we leave, whether it's with or without a deal, what we have will be compensated by some big trade arrangement with the United States. Well, quite apart from the fact that any such arrangement will not be in the British interests and will be very difficult to negotiate, and actually will concern only very limited things because most American regulations are at state level, not federal level. The American House of Representatives has already said they won't ratify it if Ireland is abandoned. So that's not going to happen either. So they say, well, we can leave without a deal, and Johnson has said, well, we can leave without a deal and then prepare for an orderly exit over a 2-year period. But it's already been agreed that there isn't the 2-year period only applies if there is an agreed deal. So that is untrue and cannot happen. They then say, well, all of that doesn't really matter because we can leave on what they call WTO terms. Well, I mean, it just happens that before I became an MP, I spent quite a lot of my time involved in trade negotiations. I did work with the WTO. It's one of these very nice organisations like the United Nations that sets out fine principles, but it doesn't work. It no longer works. The rules are no longer applied because the Americans have pulled the plug from under it, and the Trump administration doesn't accept the WTO anymore. So none of their rules and dispute settlement procedures work anymore. Effectively, we're leaving into a complete vacuum. So we're faced with the possibility of leaving on the 31st of October with no agreement on any basic trade provisions, which is potentially lethal for farmers, amongst others, and for the supply chain industries like Airbus and the car industry, and the Welsh farmers who are critical in Brecon. They're already considering having to slaughter most of their sheep and cattle herds because they won't be able to sell any of their product. So those are the trade impacts, which could be massive. You've then got the fact that we wouldn't be operating any longer under common standards. We had a businessman at the Taunton business event I did at lunchtime. He was just explaining, he wasn't lib dem, I don't think he was anything really. He was just explaining, as a practical businessman who exports packaged agricultural products from Somerset, cheeses and so on, that he simply won't be able to trade anymore because the packaging will no longer apply. And yesterday I had a conversation with pharmaceutical companies who have been hoarding, because of fear of a no-deal Brexit, vast amounts of drugs. Last year, which was when we had our previous exit day, they were stuck with all the stock when it didn't happen. Cost them an arm and a leg, and they're not doing it again. So they don't have the stocks of medicines. So many people will be left without critical supplies of medicine. But the whole thing is just utterly chaotic. There is no planning taking place that's at all meaningful. If we do finish up crashing out, and yet at the same time, Johnson is saying that's what we're determined to do. So I'm confused. You're probably confused as to what the real intentions are. But there are two imperatives. One is that we absolutely have to stop the no-deal Brexit happening. But that presents a problem because at the moment we would crash out without a deal because it's the default option under the legislation. It could happen by accident unless Parliament votes to stop it. And various devices are being considered by some of the more thoughtful Tories, and you've probably heard of Dominic Green and various others, to bring in legislative devices which will prevent this thing happening by accident. We're having a whole series of votes on it tomorrow. I don't know whether they will work or not. And the other is that if those devices don't work, the only way to stop some catastrophic event happening is if we have a vote of no confidence in the government, which then precipitates an election. Now, Johnson is quite categorical that they won't have an election, but it's possible that Parliament could decide that we will, because a sufficient number of Tories are willing to rebel. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, amongst others, my successor as Business Secretary, 20 or 30 others have said we will bring down our own government in order to stop this catastrophe happening. So there are mechanisms. an election or some procedural device to stop the crashing out without a deal at the end of October. But they're all a little bit iffy. None of us can really guarantee what will happen. We do know that a lot of Conservative rebels, but there are also a lot of Labour rebels. The Labour Party is disintegrating, and it's in a appalling state of civil war, because you've got the Marxist-Leninist leadership, which is a bizarre situation in a Western democracy. You've got large numbers of Social Democrats who are, more moderate Labour people, probably the majority of MPs, at the moment led by Tom Watson, who are openly saying they want to overthrow Corbyn, but they can't. What will they do? I don't know. But there's another group of about 20 Labour MPs who want Brexit. So will they cancel out the rebel Tories? We don't know. So we're entering into a very, very uncertain and worrying time. I mean, the one great strength of our party is that people know exactly where we stand. I think the fact that we were honest, unambiguous, absolutely clear to the point of being rather vulgar. I think the message got across even to people who weren't terribly switched on where we were in this argument. And I think people value that. And I think a lot of people who actually support leaving the European Union voted for us because they know, at least they know where they stand with us and they respect our honesty and they like some of the other things we do. So that's the position on the big issue of the day. I'm desperately keen, as I think most people in our party are, to get on to other subjects. I mean, at the moment, Parliament is completely moribund. No legislation is being passed. Nothing is being discussed of any substance. We're just endlessly recycling the same arguments the government's filling in time. Really important issues like social care, how you deal with the new generation of technologies, reform of further and higher education.
Climate change.
Climate change, yes, indeed, environmental issues. I mean, these are all being put on the back burner. And I think we're desperate to get onto them, but we can't because there's this giant boulder on the path preventing any progress. But I think what we need to do as a party is stick fast with where we are in terms of our basic position, try to talk about the wider agenda, those issues that we just mentioned, try and build up our strength, partly through by-election victories, and we're going to get one, I think, and there may be others in the autumn. We're going to try to get people crossing and joining us. I've been in conversation with several Conservatives and Labour people who are fairly close to joining us, but there's big inhibitions actually crossing over parties. We've had one, Chuka, who is a great asset, really, really great actually, full of energy and idealism, and he realises he was a Lib Dem all along, I think. And there are quite a few others who are potentially in the same principle. But I think what we have to prepare for is an election in the autumn. It may happen by design, it may happen by accident. I would rank the possibility as probably about 30-40%, something like that. I don't think it's certain, but it's certainly a high possibility. You've got an excellent candidate, and a lot of the groundwork's been done, but we've got to think about this possibility happening within the next 6 months or so. That's all I want to say, but I'm happy to take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.